To be honest. Yeah. Oh, that's scary. I just asked a question.
All right, we're ready to start. We're going to start on time. Thank you all for coming. We have a wonderful evening for you tonight. I think you'll really enjoy. This is always kind of magical the way people come together, talk from many different angles, and you just see that there's a connecting thread. So we started these Leonardo Art Science Evening Rendezvous 8 years ago now. When we started, there was maybe 3 around the country. The first one was set up by Piero Scaruffi in San Francisco. Today, there's 30 around the world, and they just keep growing. And what they're meant to do, which you will see in action, is introduce people to each other through work of selected 4 or 5 people that talk for a very short time, but very quickly you get a sense of what the research is, and it could be coming from the science side or from the art side, and then there's a connection and a lot of collaborations, friendships, dialogues happen, so it's more of a social event. You don't sit through an hour-long lecture, but actually get a very good kind of tapestry of ideas. So having said that, I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Roberta, who I just heard of through my email thread. You're a Fulbright scholar, correct? Yeah. So a Fulbright scholar from Trento, Italy, who's working on some very interesting research that I don't know much about, so I've invited her over so she can tell us all. And when you're finished with your introduction, the next person's names will come, you'll just introduce them. So give a big applause to Roberta Rafael.
So, good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for this great opportunity. Thank you, Victoria, for the invitation. And I'm very glad to be here with you tonight. I come from North Italy. As Victoria said, I'm a Fulbright scholar here, exactly in that building, a life sciences building at the Institute of Society and Genetics. I am an anthropologist, and I teach a design faculty of the Free University of Bolzano. This is our faculty. Bolzano is a city in the northern part of Italy, really at the border with Austria. And just to give you an idea, okay, the university, it is in the city, of course, but all around we are surrounded by mountains like this and these idyllic landscapes. And as I told you, I'm an anthropologist, but I work in the design faculty. We have a wonderful program in which the students during the semester have to develop a design product, and they have not 1 professor, but 3 professors working together. So I, as an anthropologist, work with the designer and also with the web designer. And we all together interact with students to help them to leverage their ideas and to help them, for example, I help them to contextualize their ideas, to expand in the social cultural domain, and the other professor give more design advices, but we are very integrated, are not separate teachings, so it's very exciting. And since in the university and in the faculty of design especially there is this interest in interdisciplinarity, it will be launched a new program, a new project, 2 new projects that will start this coming year, in which faculty is interested to understand how art and design can mediate, express, help to think through science. So these are two very innovative projects for our university, and the university is interested to collect examples, case studies of institutions that already do this work. And so, of course, when I arrived here, immediately everybody directed me to Victoria, and I'm very glad to see all this community around exactly this topic. So I hope this will be just the starting of a nice exchange. But why I am interested in science as an anthropologist? I have a background in medical anthropology, so medical anthropology study, to simplify, let's say, how culture interacts with the way in which people think at their health or at their body, and how they deal with their body or their status of health of illness. And since some years, I'm interested in this topic, which is the microbiome, because since more or less a decade, scientists discovered that our body is not that defined boundary that we think we are, but instead is something more like this. So we are a community, we are an ecosystem of microbes. We are 90% of the cells we carry on every day is of non-human origin, but is of microbial origin. So we are this ecosystem of microbes, 90%, yes, you heard correctly. And so for me as an anthropologist, you can understand this is fascinating, because in a way forces us to rethink what is a body, what is health, and to rethink and valorize the significance of the environment in which we live. So what is health? Health is not anymore just a condition of an organ inside our bodies, but is also the quality of our environment and how we interact with this environment. So I was very interested to see how scientists make sense and apply this framework in their study in the lab. And I started to collaborate with some labs in Italy, in the northern part of Italy. And this is a slide that is used to teach to the student in this discipline, which is computational biology, because many of these advances, these discoveries, have been possible thanks to enhance computational tools that permit to map the genes of these microbes in vivo without the need to culture microbes. And what I understood is that the computational approach often underestimates the complexity of an environment, because the environment is made of nature, but nature is also cultural, is also what we do with nature, how we interact with nature. So the environment is complex and also has a social and cultural significance, which have to be included in the study of the environment for the microbiome. But you can see all these complexities, a lot of things, a lot of variables, and the idea is that all this complexity does not fit in the computer. And so, in a way, the idea is to not think too much in complex way, but just let the the computer make the hard work of analysis through algorithms and big data and so on. But in this way, I think we really lose the potential of this new framework, of this new paradigm in biology. So really this idea of thinking how we are connected with the environment in these complex ways, and really generating questions in the design of the experiments, and also after when you gather data on making sense of this complexity, which so far is a little bit lost, as I told you, because scientists, they tell me, we don't need to think too much through all this complexity, because once you put numbers in the computer, then the important things just come up, pop up, like magic. But we know from extensive literature that it's not really like this. Of course, many things pop up, but then what we really look at still is determined by which is our agenda, epistemological, ethical, what we care for. And so in a way, I'm very interested in collaborate also with art to integrate this computational perspective, which is crucial, with something that can portray this complexity. And maybe through this integration, also the computational biologists might become more attentive to all the big questions that are around what is an ecosystem. And so this is my interest, and what also drive me here in the Institute of Society and Genetics. And so there is this mixture of coincidences that put us in contact. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Roberta, for your words, and thank you very much, Victoria, for inviting me and for this opportunity to have the exhibition here. I'm very happy to be with all of you, and I want to talk a little about the path that is bringing me here now at this moment, studying my MFA here at UCLA at Design and Media Arts department. I think it started like this, kind of. I can remember while I was a little child, like being very, excited and very interested about why things around me happened, why it was water evaporated, things are very common, but at the same time very exciting for a child, right? So during that time, I remember doing a lot of experiments, in my own, really trying to mix things and play a little, and at the same time documenting my experiments through drawings and paintings. So I think since that time, this mixture appeared a lot. But as I grew up, of course, my interest developed towards science, and that's why I went towards studying chemistry. So that was my undergrad. My research during that time was trying to understand the compounds that were present in plants. In this case, my research was in the peel of the mandarin. So all my research was in understanding and also characterizing the compounds there. So during my labs hours, I could see this kind of beautiful images. This is a thin layer chromatography. It's a very simple and very traditional method of for identification of compounds. So at that time, I was exploring that thing in a scientific way, but at the same time, I look at and I was wow, this is really beautiful, right? These colors and this separation of compounds. Following that line, I studied a master's degree in biotechnology, and during that time I was studying the differences between the metabolomics, the difference between plants that were modified to offer resistance to droughts. And for example, here I have like different Arabidopsis that were modified so they can grow in places that water was not available. And trying to understand that difference was like the main objective of my research. Okay, so that was like my path during my school years. I had also the opportunity to work in the industry, in the pharmaceutical industry, and then like I had other kind of experiences like trying to put my own company of cosmetics. So like life for me has been like very diverse. So during those times, I really like realized that science was one of my passions, but also all the creative process that was involved during all those years. So I started to look for something that could help me to integrate these two worlds and to integrate these passions. And that's why I started to look for programs that could contain both things. And I ended up like looking to the Art Science Center, to Victoria, and I don't know, history. It made me came here. And okay, happened? Yeah. Well, after I think I skipped something, but yeah, during that time when I realized that, I started to work by myself, like trying to also start like a practice. Now, trying to use like scientific inspiration, but like trying to apply it to art. So this is kind of my first work when I was like inspired by proteins and trying to like develop in a three-dimensional way using different materials like plastic lids and make it like develop in the outside so it resembled like the naturalization of a protein. Or okay, so that was like kind of the proteins I was also like, I don't know, researching. But then I had this opportunity to work with the National Resource Center of Genetics in Mexico. And it was a great opportunity to me now work with them, not like in as a scientist, but now like participating as an artist. So we could collaborate in this lab. This lab is in charge of keeping all the genetic material for plants, for animals and microbiology, like microbes and everything from Mexico. And in this case, I could collaborate with this microbiologist and trying to like develop, like Petri pieces or bioart in this kind of form. And it was for me like kind of using like paint, right? But in this case, I was using bacteria. And these specific ones were the ones that were growing around the crops of corn. As you know, corn is very important for us as Mexicans. So it was like very like, I don't know, emblematic to work with this kind of material. We create also like this kind of, this one's was, oh, sorry. Oh, I move it a lot. It was drawing, that was like the kind of style, but these ones were more like us creating a collage. So it was a great opportunity to work with them. Then I developed my own projects as well, now working with the same technology of the chromatography, trying to resemble like landscapes. In this case, extracting compounds from plants and trying to make these chemical landscapes. So that was part of my previous work before I came here. And then when I arrived, I was trying to start thinking, well, all the time I have like been very interested in the environment and in the way we as humans interact with nature and how we create this duality and how we don't feel we belong to nature. So my first piece was trying to make this kind of, well, this is called Encounter. It's an installation, and it's representing some biomorphic piece. It's made of plastic, and it's containing organic material inside. So it's kind of also exploring this, these opposites of these materials that are human-made and these materials that are natural. So you could be surrounded by these materials, but these light materials. And I don't know, a lot of people felt that they were kind of enclosed, or like, I don't know, they felt sometimes, I hear like a good experience, but at the same time, this, I don't know, captivity or whatever. So for me, it was very important, like, to see how we encounter, and how we want to, like, encapsulate. So I will continue with that later, with that concept. But then I also work with try to find a relationship with something that was like living, and in this case, this piece is called Just Add Water, and it started like by a thought about like thinking how the little seeds start to like sprout, and how you see a seed and you cannot see that it's living, but then like you just add water and suddenly you have all this, right? During this process, I was like exposed to this 4,177 seeds. And we developed this kind of relationship between time. And it was, as a relationship, sometimes like very joyful, and we were like sprouting, very like growing each other, but at the same time, there were moments that we were not growing, that a lot of them got contaminated, and I was like very upset. And I felt this like, I'm like putting all my effort to make them grow, and at the same time they are not growing. So there was like this also, I don't know, this trying to control nature that I felt by myself. And this was like the piece itself. So this idea of the lentils brought me to this kind of closed systems. And this is why I started to start my research now in ecosystems. And well, the piece that it's outside, as some of you already heard about, yes, it's trying to think and make like reflection of how we understand ecosystems, how we can be part of them. Part of the research was based on this kind of cabinets that I found that they were like developed in 1800, and it was like fascinating for me to see how we really love nature. Like we like all the time like idealize or romanticize nature. Like this is very beautiful. This is something we want to be experiencing so often. But at the same time, we want it here. So I want it in my house, and I want it like be here, close, and everything, right? So that was part of the inspiration for this piece. And with this one, I want to also, like, since we are having here nature that it's encapsulated, like what happens if now we see this, right? Like this is another kind of vivarium. And thank you very much. Kelly.
Just step right in.
I'm sorry. I got
No,
lost
don't
getting here.
apologize. Don't apologize. So we have your slides already here.
Okay, right.
You
I
just-
some text.
Oh,
but I'll
okay.
just hold it.
Do you want to put it here, maybe?
It's okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Hi, thank you so much to the Art and Science Center and Lab for having me here tonight. My name's Kelly Nipper, and to Maru. Thank you. I'm an artist. My background, I'm going to tell you a little bit how I got to where I am right now. I guess I'll put up an image. So my background is in media arts and photography, and when I left grad school, I moved to Los Angeles to go to graduate school, and when I left graduate school, I started working at the Getty Research Institute on post-war archives there, processing post-war archives. And the first archive I worked on was Experiments in Art and Technology, which is a organization that was set up by Billy Kluver, who is part of Bell Laboratories, and Julie Martin back in the 60s, 70s, late 60s, early 70s. So coming from photography and also always being interested in the moving body, I worked on this archive, which kind of blew my mind open because I was introduced to the collaborations between engineers and dancers. And so that started my work in another direction. I worked in installation when I was in school, both college and graduate school, and in 2007 I received a commission to do my first performance, although I had been working with people in my practice, live events prior to that. Okay. So some of the images, they aren't going to exactly go with what I'm talking about. These images, these first two, are actually studies from a current project called Mechanical Landscape that I'm working on. But I'm going to go back to, okay. So I think about, sorry, I'm going to read a little bit. I think about the Earth climactically and geographically turning onto itself. The north becoming the south and vice versa, the poles sliding clockwise towards the equator and the Earth getting hotter. Climate change feedback loops inform the behavior and organization of matter and material across multiple terrestrial ecosystems. Focusing on performance experimentation across disciplinary borders, my work's foundations are in the scientific study of the moving body in space and the production of subjectivity, and also finds connections to the mechanics of photography and the camera, which are really key to my practice. Fundamental bodily movements function much the same as technological timekeepers, such as the clock or camera, to measure, shape, organize, and expand space-time. In 1998, I began working with dancers. Sorry, am I like all over the place? Okay.
No, it's good. We're following you.
Okay. So in 1998, when I got out of grad school, I started working with dancers. I have no background in dance at all. I literally come from photography and video, where there's always a camera between me and what I'm working with. So I was totally freaked out. And I worked with a choreographer as a movement translator, in a sense, with the dancers to try to communicate ideas about geometry and lines in space, talking about movement in a more conceptual way. So, and from there, also in 1998, I was introduced to the movement theorist Rudolf Laban, and who has a system called Rudolf Laban movement analysis, and also has worked with Bartinia fundamentals, which has to do with connections into the ground and lines of energy that go through all the way out through from the tips of your fingertips and all the way out through space. The system is based on the 5 platonic solids, crystalline forms, and so anyways, I was introduced to his practice, and I started to work with some of the movement system in 2007 in a performance. And then So this is a project called Test a Pattern Takes a Picture, which is also Test a Pattern Take a Picture, that I started working on in 2012. My practice has developed into very large, messy, sprawling projects. That this project is still in development. It's been shown 3 different times, and because I work within the art world, it's always a negotiation with budgets and the production people and everything. But it's been a very great experience for me. I've learned so much from the curators I've worked with and the dancers and everybody. So. And then this is so while I'm working on these large projects, I generate a lot of collages, photographs, videos to work through my ideas, to kind of see them in another medium first. And these are just some of the studies for Test a Pattern. Okay, and then this is from a project, an exhibition called Black Forest, which actually showed at the Hammer, or part of it showed at the Hammer Museum in 2013. And I work just about in any medium that I work concept-based, and then I actually worked with a ceramicist to make this, which is a globe, but it's made out of 2 bowls. This is also part of the Black Forest project, again, working with dancers. So what we've really started to explore in the studio, and now I'm just working directly with the dancers and talking, we again don't talk through a formal dance language, and I feel really lucky and I'm really grateful to work with the dancers that I have. I have learned everything from them on the ground in the studio, and really working with movement in the body as a material and space, which is such a key, moving through space, and also the space that is created by the body. And so in a project like this, just as an example, what we started to work with was working with the platonic solids, these crystalline forms, and imagining that they were inside the torso of the dancer. This is Marissa Ruizal, a dancer I've been working with for a long time. So she would move through these different points in space internally, and then it was basically what the movement looks like is just a result of what's going on inside of her body. And this isn't movement. She's been studying. We've both been studying with Laban movement analysts for over 10 years. This isn't a practice that the movement part that comes along in a couple of hours or a couple of rehearsals. And it's grown and evolved, and yes, so that's it. Thank you so much.
Do the next slide.
Yes.
You had a
Yeah,
couple.
that's yours.
There we go. Oh, are we going to another one? Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, come
okay. Thank you for introducing us.
Oh,
It's okay.
We're just seeing who's next.
It's me. All right. As you can tell from my shirt, I'm a scientist. All right, so I'm Levi, and so anthropogenic dawn, light pollution ecology. So by the way, welcome to the Anthropocene, which started, depending on who you ask, either 70 years ago or 7,000 years ago, which on a log scale is actually pretty close. So it's the human-dominated era, and light pollution is one of those parts of it. We throw off a tremendous amount of artificial light. It's a novel ecological stressor, and we're just kind of interested, like, what's it doing to the ecosystem, particularly Southern California in this case. All right, which brings me to why should we care in the first place? It's always usually a good place to start. So if you don't, then that's nihilism, and I don't really care about that. The next part is why do biologists and ecologists care? So I guess I'm an ecologist, that's cool. And then where are we going with, we're trying to ground truth something here. So how do we measure light pollution? So for a long time we've been looking using satellite-based measurements, and now we're going to be going towards trying to integrate with some ground-based tools. And then where are we going with this? Like, how are we trying to synthesize all this artificial light data into something meaningful? we're not going away as a species anytime soon, I don't think, and we blast a lot of light into the ecosystem, so what's going to happen when we do this? It's a fun experiment. All right, in case you're wondering, so this is from a Falke et al. Paper, which is, I guess, in the field of light pollution. There are dozens of us. It's a big deal. So 2016, this is an interpolated light pollution map of planet Earth at that time. To give you a rough idea, so like the dark gray is background, essentially. So it's unaffected by artificial light, running all the way up to 41 times background intensity. At that, that's all the way up to the white, which is, at that point, you never have dark adaptation of the human eye. Pupils never change. So you actually see that in parts of LA, Singapore, Tokyo, and so on. Also, fun fact, that is bright enough that you can trigger photosynthesis. Wow. So, congratulations, humanity. So we've accomplished this as a species, and by the way, it's really amazing because this is like only 150 years we've been able to do this at all. But as you can imagine, there's all sorts of unintended consequences. And the first people that really cared about this, and this is why it was ignored for a long time, were astronomers, because they couldn't see stuff. We actually start getting some satellite-based measurements in the 70s, and this is in 97, this is extrapolated out to 2025, and then back interpolating to the 50s. Sort of the North America, this is what light pollution levels look like. And for a long time, it was only astronomers that cared about it because they couldn't see the stars, and most people don't really care that much. Besides, we got satellites, we can go above that now. This is the Griffith Observatory, which was never really built to actually be a functional observatory. It's cool, and it was used in Rebel without a cause, so it served its purpose. But we have, like, if we look at this with you get this sky glow here. So this is without it, this is with. And as you can tell, you really can't see a lot, which is kind of, it's sort of depressing because, a lot of like stories that humans made up for thousands of years were based on looking up there and making up stories and pretending that those were drawings of something. Which, like, yeah, okay, we had a lot of time on our hands, but, they're cool stories, all right? And astronomers cared about it, we got satellites, but it turns out biologists probably are going to end up caring way more about this, and ecologists. Because it turns out, like, yeah, okay, we can't see the stars, but then again, a lot of other things can't see them either, and ecologically, that does matter. So I wanted to include this as a photo to illustrate this point. The lowly dung beetle uses the galactic plane to navigate, so it rolls around little balls of shit according to the patterns of 100 billion stars. Congratulations. So if you can't see that, though, it can't know where to put all the balls of shit. All right? Well, okay, that's not really, like, amazing, but sea turtles can't navigate. They need the moon, and if you have a bunch of artificial lights on the beach, they're going to get thrown off. Insects, some of them are attracted to near ultraviolet light, violet, ultraviolet, a lot of things that we throw off. Some of them are repelled, so you get all sorts of habitat segregation. So some things win, some things don't. And it really throws a lot of things out of whack because we've had this light-dark cycle now going on about 4.5 billion years, and we're starting to throw it off. And it is a real novel ecological stressor. So I know, like, we all worry about, like, CO2 and methane and all that, but the Earth's seen this before. So 250 million years ago, Permian extinction, tons of hydrogen sulfide, CO2, 96% of all known species wiped out. We're probably not going to top that, okay? But it's never seen this. It's never seen just a ton of LEDs. Okay, that really is a novel stressor. We don't really know what's going to happen. Worst case scenario, if we pump a lot of CO2, we know it gets warmer. Oceans get more acidic, okay, that sort of stuff. But this, not so sure yet. So I'm starting with this kind of data, and this is from VEERS, which I can never remember this acronym. I still can't remember this acronym. Anyway, it stands for something with light. But it's a satellite, and we started launching satellites to look at things at night, originally for intelligence. And we've been doing this now for decades, and we've been mapping out, and right now we can get down to a 30 arc seconds resolution, 742 meters on the side, for those of you who are wondering. And we can map out the Earth, and we can do this at really good resolution. We can do things like average out, remove cloud cover, remove forest fires, and get long-term trends in light pollution. So, great. But there's a problem here. There's certain limitations, at least in the field of biology and ecology, where this doesn't quite work that well anymore. And this is why. And it's not because we're asking for funding. All right, there's a couple of things that we miss by just looking at the kind of satellite data that we're collecting. One of them is just the spatial resolution. There's a lot that can happen in 742 meters. There's a movie title in there somewhere. The other problem is that the spectrum starts in the middle of the visible spectrum. Okay, if you're only worried about, like, artificial light, you don't have to get the full visible spectrum. We start at 500 nanometers. which is roughly green-yellow. It doesn't get down to the bottom of the visible spectrum with violet, about 300 nanometers, or the other stuff like near ultraviolet below that, which is also relevant. And it also only captures upwards radiance. So it only gets the stuff that punches all the way straight up through the atmosphere. But the big problem, if you're a bug or a mountain lion or a human being, and you're trying to navigate and you have the sky glow, it's all the stuff that wraps around the base of the sky. It's not just the stuff that punches up through. In fact, the stuff that's near the horizon is actually even more important. So you get a lot of just scattering. The atmosphere just scatters all the light around, and what goes up just goes around. So you can get stuff like, you can be all the way out near Death Valley, you can see the sky glow from Las Vegas or Los Angeles pretty easily, because the atmosphere just scatters it. So how do we essentially factor this in? Well, good question, me. All right, so we got this proposal and it got funded. And what we're going to do is we're going to start taking ground-based measurements at exact locations where the satellite's been collecting data. And we're using a hemispheric camera, so this really cool fisheye lens thing. By the way, you can buy one of these on, like, they're about $1,000 on Amazon, but you have to get them calibrated. There's one group in Slovenia that does the calibration, but it's probably worth it. Anyway, this is the Santa Monica Pier. So this is the hemispheric sky glow. So this just gets the entire sky. And then what we do is we can generate the color temperature and the intensity. So color temperatures is like fun thing where you're like, oh, if it's blue, it's hotter than it's red. And it's a way of gauging the spectrum, because the spectrum of light pollution is also important. And again, we're missing a lot out of the satellites. So we're going to be taking a ton of these measurements on the ground, and we're still getting that satellite data, and what we're going to do is try to meet in the middle here. And what we're going to do, and this is a genuine undergrad who's going to help me with this, so we're going to be taking measurements from, well, just to make this manageable, in North Ventura County to South Orange County, and what we're going to be doing is taking hundreds of measurements, probably actually close to 1,000. We're going to take this hemispheric camera, and we're going to, all right, the satellite sees this, what do we see? And then we start building a model given things like cloud cover, humidity, time, and all that. And you can start building a model. So you know that if the satellite sees this, and this is what the weather is, this is what the actual ecologically relevant light pollution should be. So that's what we're actually going to do, is try to ground truth it. Just because you see it in space doesn't mean that's really what it looks like on Earth. And so we're going to ground truth all this. We're going to get these models going so that when someone gets satellite data in the future, they can go like, all right, this is what it should look like. And then we start, connecting this with models of like, oh, we're looking at migration of California grunions, we're looking at migration of the western snowy plover, this bird, and we're also looking at stuff that moves up and down the water column, which again is going to be affected by lunar cycles, diurnal cycles, so they use light. And so what we want to do is figure out how to integrate what we're seeing from just all this artificial light, let's say in Southern California, how is it influencing this ecosystem? So anyway, this is kind of a cool project, and we're going to start taking data in June for this stuff, just for the light pollution, and it'll be about 6 months to get the whole coast. But we got some undergrads, we got some high school students helping us out. Promise them they actually helped me write the paper, they got co-authorship, so that'll be cool for their college jobs. I used to teach high school, so kids are our future until we build better robots. All right, so anyway, I'd like to also thank the people that are footing the bill for this. So Sea Grant California and NOAA. So they cut the check, which is nice. And I also like to thank, and this is in case of any of you are interested, this is in Culver City near here. This is Crash Space. Support your local hackerspace. I've been part of it for 8 years. It's been great. So we're like the Freemasons, except we build things. And there's hackerspaces all over the world. This is what it looks like. Look at those people hacking things. All right, and we do a lot of stuff with open source hardware, but we have a lot of artists and a lot of people that try to connect the two. I guess it usually shows up in Burning Man. But just trying to make science look cool, or trying to engineer stuff that's artsy. Okay, as you can tell, I'm not really an artist, but I like working with artists because they make things look nice, and that's makes life better. All right, so I've said my piece. Thank you. Yeah. All right.
Good job. Well, that was fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm John Hood, professor of art and design at Hancock College. It's about 4 hours north, so Central Coast. And Victoria has invited me to talk not so much about research, which this has been amazing to hear everybody's research. And I was thinking to myself, when I was working on my master's research, I was thinking, God, it just seems like so long ago, like a quarter century ago. And then I realized it was, that long ago. So it's very exciting to see everybody's work. Actually, it's nice that I'm kind of ending this because what everybody's talking about is what I'll be highlighting tonight. Why I'm here is because Victoria asked me to talk about a very remarkable collection of work that was collected by an individual, David Bermant, from the mid-60s to the 90s. And it was focused on art and technology. So I wanted to show you what one guy, this patron of the arts, collected, and I think you'll see a connection here. So it's basically a history of art and technology in my area. So I'm up on the Central Coast, and this collection that is housed in this wonderful building in Los Olivos or Santa Ynez area is close to my college. So I go there maybe once a month to show people this incredible collection. So what it does, it's a collection that deals with experimental art. It works with every facet of kinetic art, light art you can imagine. Here's David Bermant, the collector, and he wanted to collect things not so much because it connected to art history, although it did. He was more interested in how artists utilize technology of the time, whether it was from the 30s on to the 60s, 70s, and so forth. So just a little bit about David Bermant. He was a developer, and mainly East Coast, and eventually had shopping malls, and many of them, almost 24 of them, what we think of these classic malls. But in those, he also promoted public art, so you can see some of the public art that he was willing to showcase on his property. The place, again, is in the Santa Ynez, Los Olivos area of the Central Coast, where I'm only 25 minutes away from that at the college. So I bring a lot of my students there. I teach art design and modern art. So my connection here is more about what I teach my students about modern art. So what it has, it's out there in the boonies of this beautiful Central Coast, and I always joke that it doesn't move, kinetic art, because it doesn't travel. It can never leave the space. So once you go to the building that houses all these beautiful works, you'll see people that may be in the art history books. A lot of them actually aren't. But one of the first, what got David Bermant interested in collecting was this one by Alviani. And what it is it's a two-dimensional plane, but the way that it's ground in this aluminum makes it look like it has a push-pull effect. So it's a part of that op movement of the 60s, 70s, the optical movement. So it has this wonderful shimmer to it, and it's fascinating, and you can tell that for a collector, he was fascinated by things that were non-traditional, because he could have collected a lot of different things. So he was interested in works that extend the boundaries, definitely non-traditional materials, as you'll see. And so it's housed in a building where David and his second wife, Susan, lived for many years. David passed away in 2000, and so the collection was built up over many, many years. Every time I'm in there, I think when I'm showing people around and talking about the work, that everything in there is what I call Duchampian. Everything relates to these ready-mades that he did in the teens and to the 20s, and the experimentation of Duchamp. And what got me excited was that Susan Hopman, the second wife of David, was talking about the art historical context of this work. And one of the works that she mentioned having was the roto-relief by Duchamp. Even though he was very well known, way before this, he starts to get into kinetic art, and he starts to create these amazing pieces. And I do have video. Let's see if it goes to video. Maybe. No, it's not going to do it. But what it does is it spins. So it's a two-dimensional print, and then when it starts to spin, you have that push-pull effect, that depth that is created. And so he started doing that in the 30s. And then here you can see him with the roto-relief. And then, so as you go throughout the whole collection, you'll see pieces from people that aren't necessarily in those beginning, modern art surveys. Wilfred is one of those artists that you could consider kind of the father of media arts and projection art. And so what he did was he created these little glass discs, and then he would paint on them, these little abstractions, and then it would be projected up with light and mirrors up to a concave piece of paper, and you would see this moving image because the disc would move too. And so it's, yeah, and I do have video, but
If you click on it, it doesn't work.
no, I don't see the cursor. But well, this is a good old image of it. So if you can imagine, and for all of us that are in the arts, thinking about this experimental light art, so again, the beginnings of media art, here's Thomas Wilfred projecting these moving, beautiful images, as you can see here, onto a screen with an orchestra. So it was multidisciplinary, multisensory work in the 20s. So pretty overwhelming of what that means. It's kind of the equivalent, if Orson Welles working with Tolan, the cinematographer, and doing really experimental shots in film. It's on that level. So there's everything under the sun there in the collection, and what's great for my students is we're always looking at these incredible images, but then I can actually say, hey, you want to drive 25 minutes and go see these real pieces in action. Nam June Pae, South Korean artist, he's got one of his first pieces there, Participation TV. Here's actually David Bermant, the patron, participating and making these incredible little abstractions with his voice. Then you have Otto Peña that does light ballet and who's the chair at MIT, and again makes these incredible light rooms, these little installations where the light goes around inside the cylinder and lights up the whole room. So these are kind of the movers and shakers of the media arts world. You could say it goes back to Bauhaus when they were experimenting in the 20s, Mihaly Nagy, and trying to figure out how art and technology combine, and what do you do with it once you've figured out some really amazing combinations. Schoeffer, when you get into the 60s, you see someone like Nicholas Schoeffer working with something called microtemps, and that one again just has these incredible moving parts to it. And Tangley, who is in art history books, so it's interesting when you're going through modern art, some people are very much highlighted, and others you maybe hadn't heard of so much. But David tended to collect because he enjoyed the work. He enjoyed how people, artists were coming together and utilizing materials of the time, whether it was LED, fiber optics, or holographic film. How he got the work, he had several sources, someone like Howard Weiss or Ivan Karp. I think I have Ivan Karp here. These are the people that were famous for other things, but also had kinetic art and more non-traditional light art pieces. Clyde Lind, who worked with fiber optics, which is unusual. I've only met 2 or 3 people that work with fiber optics, because you can see they're so tiny and fragile, but they make some beautiful patterns. They have bubble sculpture, which you can kind of see there, but they're actual bubbles that creep up a little plane of glass slowly, and then inside of it are these wonderful moving prisms because of how the water and the petroleum-based product inside the bubbles interact with each other. So gets us into the 80s. And then Alejandro and Moracina do light art. One of those from MIT, artist in residence there. and creates these spiral shafts. And these are all videos. Oh, there's my cursor. I don't know if that can work. Let's see why it's not working.
You can maybe show it afterwards.
Yeah. But someone like the Sinyas, who create these amazing works, and you can see students down here looking straight up into what's called lasso, and it's amazing neon tubes that spin around and create this kinetic sculpture. And this is the view from the floor up. So again, it's a good opportunity to see a history of light art, kinetic art, beginnings of media art. It's very rare, it's very special. For one of my favorites, Sally Weber, A Grandiose Title, A Threshold of a Singularity. But this piece, it's very simple with the light and the water dripping into a pan that has kind of a mirrored surface. And at the angle, it shines the light onto a plane of plexiglass that has holographic film on it. So it gives you that visible spectrum. And it's wonderful because when you look at the front of the plane, it's the full spectrum. But when you deviate to the left or right of it, it goes to achromatic. So it's about kind of stripping life away. You know, it's a memorial to her father who had passed away. And then this little known Victoria Vesna is in the collection. No, I'm kidding. She's always the one I end up at the end of the tour talking about, not only because it's later in the collection, but I like that it's full circle. You know, Victoria is one of the board members at the foundation, and she's got nano mandala that starts with one grain of sand and then slowly starts to reveal a whole mandala, sand mandala, created by monks over, as you can see, over a lot of time. And so she's photographing, the one grain to echo that mantra of one is many and many is one. And you can see the detail that you can get with the nanoscience of it. So that's a multi-sensory piece too, because the few times that I've been with Victoria that shows it, sometimes you can actually, you'll have audio of the monks creating it. You can hear them with the sand and rubbing their funnels. And then they're also, when Victoria's there, you can actually go into the sand and, manipulate it and throw it up in the air. And I guess sometimes you have a dancer inside, or but I haven't. Yeah, it gets messy if you do all that. So we end on something like that, and it's incredible because it takes a long time for it to cycle through. Has anybody been there? I should have asked, to the collection. To my colleagues. And,
Maru.
Good. So that's the main thing, is that all of what's been presented here and things you're probably working on or thinking about, this is the beginnings of it. These are people working in the 1920s, 30s, all the way to the 90s and 2000s, trying to figure out how to put the two together, art and technology. And some of it is, oh, there you go. Here's one of those. And it just shows you a wonderful history of that type of art that used to get overlooked, but I think it's like becoming one of the premier art forms, as we can see from our research. So that's the David Berman Foundation. Thanks, Victoria.
So as you can see, even though there's many different disparate talks that we heard, there's a kind of a connection, a thread. I mean, we started with Roberta talking about the microbiome and the body and a different way of looking at the body. Maru is looking at how we, our bodies, ourselves, connect to nature and how we relate with nature, which of course makes us think about pollution that Ariel, Levi brought up in a pretty fun, great way, and I'm really excited actually to find out more about the light pollution and your research. And the crash space, the hacker space, is something that we should look at. And Kelly, you were talking about how you started with the experiments in art and technology, which in the 60s was this kind of experiment in the Bell Labs where they brought artists and scientists together and technologists. And it's supposedly, people say, failed, but actually that failure left so many reverberations. It is evident in this collection. And what those artists were doing in the 20s and 30s were really actually responding to a very new world with all the technology, the industrialization, computers, and what all that means. In other words, getting off the wall, getting into the body, getting into the environment, etc. What we're seeing now, which is very exciting to me actually, is that artists and scientists want to work together. We need to work together because we're in a pretty urgent situation where, as was pointed out by Levi, we don't really know. And so whatever is happening right now with us, we don't really know. We're in this kind of soup. So it's as if it's 1917 now, and we're just into this First World War or something. We don't know what's happening. Coming together is actually critical, and it's fantastic to see this group. I thank you very much, all of you. I thank the students for coming. That's great. I hope you got a lot out of it. And now we hang out a little bit, so we talk to each other. Don't just run out of the door. All right? Take care.